Greetings from Jacksonpal Pharmaceuticals Limited. I, Dr. Vipin Tyagi, welcome you to the webinar today on infertility practice organized by Faridabad Obs-Gynae Society, FOGS. This webinar is brought to you as knowledge sharing initiative by Jacksonpal Medical Services. We would like to thank Dr. Kiran Chandna, President FOGS, and Dr. Chanchal Gupta, Honorary Secretary FOGS, for arranging this webinar, and also thanks to ICOG for the accreditation of 1 point. We welcome all the attendees present with us today. Hope all of you enjoy this session. It may kindly be noted that this session is streaming on Facebook Live, and the recording will remain on Jacksonpal's YouTube channel for reference and knowledge sharing. I will now request Dr. Chanchal Gupta ma'am to kindly initiate this session. Ma'am.
You are muted. Dr. Chanchal, you are muted. Unmute yourself.
Yeah. I think you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I welcome you all on behalf of Faridabad Obstetrics and Gynae Society, and hoping all of you are safe and healthy. Actually, this small bug of COVID-19 has changed our lives to beyond our imagination. We were really very happy initially, like in the lockdown phase, we were off our work for some time, but now it's we are getting bored, and we really want to restart our work. And it's now been 3 to 4 months. We feel even the guidelines and everything says we probably have to stay with this pandemic for another maybe few months or a year. So definitely we need to restart our work, and today's webinar is aimed at the same point, how to restart our work in infertility, how to restart our labs and all. So we have expert panelists and our speaker today to guide you on that basis. Today our speaker for the talk and our moderator is Dr. Kuldeep Jain. He is Director IVF and IVF Specialist at KG IVF and Laparoscopic Center, Faridabad and Delhi. He is also Program Director at KG IVF ART Center, Faridabad. He had been Founder, Secretary and past President of IFS and Chairperson International Exchange Committee, Indian Fertility Society, and many more accreditations to added to him, as you all can see in this slide. So I welcome Dr. Kuldeep Jain, and also I would request all of you to vote and support him as he's standing for the post of Vice President candidate Foxy North Zone. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Chanchal, for kind words and kind invitation. It is my pleasure to be connecting to my second home, that is Faridabad. I have been associated with Faridabad and Faridabad Society colleagues for almost now 25 years plus. And it is really good to see all of you. And for that, I am thankful to Dr. Kiran, President, Faridabad Obs-Gynae Society, and Dr. Chanchal, General Secretary of Faridabad Society, for giving me this opportunity to connect with all the members during this difficult time. So thank you once again. Today's topic is actually very relevant for today's situation. We are going to have a short lecture on very basic technique, that is IUI, what are the recommendations and how we can optimize. And that will be followed by a very important discussion on how to restart fertility services. And for that, we are having a very excellent panel, which is having a blend of stalwarts and the upcoming fertility consultants to discuss on that subject. So I will be starting with my first talk, that is IUI evidence base. Can you see my slides?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I take this opportunity, as Dr. Chanchal has already highlighted, that I am your candidate for Vice President Foxy this year. So I take this opportunity to seek your vote and blessings and support for my election as Vice President Foxy. As you all know that I have been associated with Foxy for last 35 years. And during this 3 decades, I have been associated with Foxy in different positions. My last position in Foxy was chairperson endometriosis committee. Uh, that ended with a very productive 3 years. And now I'm looking for a bigger role in Foxy. So I request all of you to cast your vote from 1st September to 10th September. The voting will be online and you will be getting the ballot paper soon. Coming on to the topic of today, that is intrauterine insemination. What are the evidence-based guidelines? Now, when we talk of IUI, it is a simple procedure and we should always keep it simple. Looking at the basic principles, there are 2 basic principles. What we are doing here, we are exposing more oocytes, that is number 1, to more sperms, that is number 2, at the site or near the site of fertilization at right time. So these are 3 basics of intrauterine insemination. And if we keep these things in mind, we can always optimize our IUI cycles. As I have already highlighted, it is a simple procedure, so we should always keep it simple whenever we are practicing it on our patients. Now, what is important actually in IUI? Proper patient selection is very important. If we have not selected our patient properly for IUI, we cannot get pregnancy. So I think I will like to have more time on this proper patient selection. What are the patients? Which patients should go for IUI? How many cycles can be done IUI in a particular situation? And which patients should directly go to IVF? So I think that is very important. Then second thing is individualization of induction protocol. We keep on talking that natural cycle IUI can be done, but when we want to optimize our result, we have to have a induced cycle because I have already highlighted that one of the important rationale is we have to increase the number of oocytes in the cycle, and that will optimize the chances of conception. So that's why individualization of induction protocol is very important. And third thing is timing of insemination. So these 3 things are very important, and one should know when to stop. So in next 20 minutes, I am going to cover these issues: selection of patient, how important it is, natural versus stimulated cycles, clomiphene versus HMG. Is there any role of agonist or antagonist in IUI cycle? Is there any influence of number of follicle on outcome? Timing of IUI, what is the best timing of IUI, and single or double IUI? Then, of course, semen collection, IUI interval, is it important? I will not go into the detail of method of sperm selection. Then many other things like troubleshooting. When we say there is a caution, we always have to have individualized approach whenever we are discussing these recommendations. So coming on to how important is the selection of patient for successful outcome in IUI. These are some of the prerequisites, and these have to be kept in mind whenever we are planning a IUI program. Age is very important because we know that fecundity decreases as the age advances. And when it comes to IUI, if we are selecting elderly patient in our program, we will not achieve the desired goal in these patients. So it is always better that our IUI patients, they should be less than 35. Even if we are planning, if the patient has actually married late, like 36-year marriage, should we go for IVF? No, I am not suggesting that. But then you have to counsel these patients very, very carefully. You have to evaluate them properly, and then only you can offer them IUI. So it is not like 36, 37, you cannot offer IUI, but the chances of conception will be poor, and that you have to counsel to the patient also. Then there should be a ovarian reserve which can be used for at least 3 to 4 cycles of IUI. Otherwise, if the patient is starting, even if the patient is young and there is less reserve, uh, you should not be starting these patients for IUI if the less reserve is there. So it is not only age, it is the reserve which you have to see, and it should be inducible. Then at least one fallopian tube with good tube-ovarian relationship should be available. And fourth thing is sperm count, uh, at least usable sperm count. Now we will discuss in detail what is the usable sperm count or what is the optimal sperm count for IUI. Uh, so these are some of the situations where IUI may not be helpful at all. Like if you are selecting your patient which is tubal factor, you may not get result whatever you do, whatever protocol you use, whatever infrastructure you are having, whatever time you are inseminating. But if the patient is having tubal factor, probably this is not a right candidate for IUI. Severe male factor. Again, I keep on seeing the people undergoing IUI in severe male factor. I think we need to understand that recommendations are there, but we have to take recommendation in right perspective. Recommendation is if you are having 1 million motile sperms, you can go ahead for IUI. Yes, you can go ahead, but the chances of success will be very, very poor. The second line we have to read. Okay, so severe male factor are actually not the right candidate for IUI, and they should all go for IVF. Endometriosis grade 3, grade 4. Again, these are not right patients for IUI, and they may not be helped by offering IUI. Then, of course, elderly female, I have already touched, and tuboperitoneal factors. Now, these are various prognostic factors. If you take female age, and here is the cycle fecundity. This is the data from 2017 fertility sterility. And here you can see as the age advances, your fecundity is going down. So when you are considering IUI in and around 40 years, it is only 6%. And that is not the right type of optimization of your program. This is another table where you can see as the age advances, the fecundity goes down with the age. Another factor is number of motile sperms available. And here again, you can see if the number of motile sperm is 1 million or 2 million, fecundity is almost 0. It may increase to certain extent when it reaches to 5 million. This is a very old paper, but over the period, what we have seen, if you are having less than 5 million in the final count, then your fecundity is not more than 5 to 6%. And when it increases, when your count is increases up to 10 million, you can have a reasonable success rate. So depending on the number of motile sperms, you can get your fecundity. Cause of infertility is again one important factor. Like when you are dealing with unexplained infertility, usually we get a quite reasonable success rate of 20-22%. Even in ovulatory dysfunction, when we are having more number of eggs, we are doing IUI at right time, we can have a reasonable success rate. But look at here, poor pregnancy rate in endometriosis, not more than 11 to 12%. Immunological infertility is not very promising here, and moderate to severe male factor, it is 6 to 10%. So these are the patients where you are going to have poor pregnancy rate. These are the patients where you are going to have better pregnancy rate. Now coming on to the ovarian stimulation, I will not go into the details of ovarian stimulation, but certainly you have to use a ovulation which is giving harvesting at least 2 to 3 eggs. So that you have to choose, and it should be basically available and least expensive with minimal complication. So that is what we are looking at. What is the optimal stimulation for IUI? 2 to 4 follicles of 18 to 19 millimeter. Of course, we are not measuring blood E2 level, but if you are measuring, then it should be around 200 picogram per follicle. Usually, we do not measure any blood estimation in IUI program. You should have a endometrial lining 8 to 10 millimeter. So these are some of the parameters which you have to look for a successful IUI. Now, what are the factors which influence your ovulation induction? One is female age, very important. Same drug in elderly female may not act properly. So you have to consider this. Then ovarian reserve, and third is BMI. Clomiphene citrate, again, I will not go into the detail, but usually we practice cutting corner regime. What is cutting corner regime? 50 milligram is out because only 40% of the patients are going to be ovulating. 150 is also out because the chances of adding to the ovulation or adding to the what you call improving the success rate are not much. So we start with 100 milligram. If your patient doesn't ovulate with 100 milligram, better you move on to the other drug rather than repeating 150 milligram, 200 milligram. So that is what is advisable. Another drug which is better and is in competition with clomiphene citrate is letrozole. And there are many advantages using letrozole over the clomiphene. It is actually providing almost same action without depleting the estrogen receptors as in clomiphene we see. And important thing is there is no estrogen receptor down regulation. So we are not having any adverse effect on target tissue. And moreover, it is increasing the sensitivity to FSH. So increasing follicular sensitivity also adds to the number of follicle and growth of the follicle. So these are some of the advantages of letrozole, and that's why it is a preferable drug nowadays over clomiphene. We have been using clomiphene for almost more than 50 years, but there was a need of a oral ovulation, and now we are having letrozole. So we always prefer letrozole over clomiphene in these patients for IUI. When we talk of gonadotropin, again, because most of the patients, they are belonging to WHO2 type. So we have to be very careful whenever we are using gonadotropin. We should always start with low dose to avoid complication and then step up. So this is one protocol which is easier, but in some of the patients, it may not be very good protocol, and then we have to titrate the dosage. Many times your patient is not responding to your protocol when you are using the gonadotropin in PCOS, and these are the patients which really gives you a lot of problem as far as the induction is concerned. So we are having a sequential step up, step down, where you start with a higher dose. So if your patient is not responding, then you can start, but this is not a very favorable protocol. Starting with higher dose, and once the follicle is selected, you step down. So that is another protocol which is used, but risk of ovarian hyperstimulation is quite high in this protocol. And this is a very favorable protocol where you combine oral ovulation with what you call gonadotropin. So combining letrozole with gonadotropin usually gives a very, very good response in resistant cases. We use less gonadotropin, it is more cost effective, we are having a better endometrial growth and usually comparable conception rate. When we talk of natural versus CC versus HMG, this is one study which is already highlighted that if you are using natural cycle, fecundity rate are very, very poor. When you are using clomiphene citrate, you can increase it to certain extent, but the best rates you get in gonadotropin cycle. So is it suggested that you give all patients gonadotropin? No, that is not the suggestion, but gonadotropin should be there in your armatorium in those patients who are not getting pregnant. This is a Cochrane database which has again highlighted that gonadotropins are most effective drugs, but you have to be little careful when you are using. So it is not a primary drug, but certainly it should come early in your program when your patient is not conceiving. This is another review where they have again compared CC versus HMG, and all reports they have suggested that HMG is a better drug for getting better result. So here you can see if you are using clomiphene citrate, the pregnancy rate only 7%. When you are adding FSH, you can increase it up to 12%. This is combined data. Urinary versus recombinant, there is no difference. Many reports they have suggested. Only difference is the bioavailability of recombinant. So when your patient is not responding to urinary, you can switch over to recombinant. Otherwise, there is not much benefit. Our experience, if you see here, when I am using CC, the results are not more than 9%, 10%. When we combine CC plus HMG or letrozole plus HMG, it increases to 18 to 20%. And whenever we are having gonadotropin only cycle, it is certainly a better percentage. So same, it is coming from our experience also. And here you can see this is a paper which has highlighted the combination. Here you can see the dose, FSH dose is less when you compare the gonadotropin, pure gonadotropin cycle, and conception rate are almost same. This is our experience. You can see letrozole around 13.8%. When we combine letrozole plus FSH, the dose is only 300. And the conception rate are almost same when we compare to FSH alone. This is another paper which has compared. So all papers and my personal experience also shows that natural cycle is out. Clomiphene is again, you have to be very cautious because it is not giving us very good pregnancy rate, though ovulation is achieved. Letrozole, yes, combination is a good protocol before moving on to gonadotropin. So that is what is a recommendation also. Looking at the number of follicles, whether that is important to get a high success rate. And here you can see if you are having one follicle, success rate are not more than 8 to 10%. Whatever you use, if you are having less follicle, you are going to have less pregnancies. 2 follicles, you can increase your success rate up to 21%. 3 follicles also almost same. So what is optimum? 4 follicle, you may get a better pregnancy rate, but at the same time, you are having risk of multiple pregnancy as well as what you call risk of ovarian hyperstimulation. So this is one paper which has actually highlighted the importance of having number of follicles, 2 or 3, to give a better success rate. Here you can see 12,000 cycles, so very large data, and they have suggested that multifollicular growth is associated with increased pregnancy rate. This is our statistics, more than 3,000 cycles, and here you can see 1 follicle 10%, 2 follicle 14%, 3 follicle best rate 21%. So what I am trying to convey to you, if you are having a protocol which can generate 2 to 3 follicles, your protocol is optimized. You can get a better success rate. Coming on to the timing of insemination, it is always a debatable issue. Usually the best time is, usually we time our IUI with the what you call trigger. So you should always time your IUI with trigger, and it is anywhere 36 hours to 40 hours. So that is the recommendation. You can time it with LH, SCG administration, combination of LH, SCG, but normally how we time it is by trigger. Single versus double insemination, again a debatable issue. But most of the studies, they have suggested that there is no significant difference. Many a times it may increase the cost as well as decrease the chances of conception because of so many issues. But certainly it is not a very good idea to offer double IUI in all cases. You may select, you have to individualize your cycles, which patient may benefit on double IUI, but most of the time it is single IUI, which actually, if timed properly, post-ovulation gives a better success rate. But even if the ovulation has not occurred, you should go for a single IUI and hope for a optimized cycle. This is a lot of data which some of the studies have favored single IUI, many studies have favored double IUI, but final conclusion is there is no significant difference between single and double insemination. This is our experience on more than 3,000 cycles. Most of our cycles are single insemination. We do practice double insemination only in those patients where the ovulation has not occurred. There we call the patient on the next day, and if the ovulation has occurred, we offer a second IUI, otherwise no second IUI. And that is how we have to individualize our IUI to improve the success rate. Selecting motile sperms, I will not go into the detail. Only thing which I will like to highlight, you should have a post-wash semen which is free of any debris, free of any pus cells, free of any contamination, and having at least 5 to 10 million good motile sperms. That is what is required. You can use swim up, you can use double density, and it should not increase the DNA fragmentation. That is very important. You can select, of course, there are multiple methods, and you have to individualize the method of preparation. What is good sample for IUI? Again, I have this data from 2002, and here you can see if it is more than 5 million, you can have a respectable pregnancy rate. If the motility is more than 50%, again you can have a respectable pregnancy rate. A word about the interval, actually semen collection to IUI interval again is very, very important. You should not keep your prepared sample for long because it generates ROS and DNA fragmentation increases. So as soon as your sperm are prepared, you should inseminate. that is very well correlated. This is about the luteal phase, and we do practice, and I suggest that one should use luteal phase. Again, there are a lot of debates that luteal phase is not required in all cycles, but this has been my experience as well as data from many studies, that luteal phase is, because in these patients there is defective folliculogenesis always. Most of the time you are not looking at the defective folliculogenesis, and that's why you are not able to find out the luteal phase defect. So if you are not giving luteal phase support, you are going to have poor pregnancy rate. This is another paper which has same outcome. Again, another paper, same outcome. So there are multiple papers which are in support of luteal phase, and I prefer to give luteal. The last slide, how many cycles? Not more than 4 in any case. You can see this chart. As you progress after 4 cycles, the fecundity rate goes down. So these are the recommendation which I will like to highlight. Maximum of 2 dominant follicles. No sperm washing technique is superior to another. Single well-timed IUI. No place of agonist or antagonist. May be individualized but not in routine protocol. And cutoff value of post-was sperm, if you are having 5 to 10 million, you can have a optimized IUI cycle. And if your patient doesn't conceive in 3 to 4 cycles of IUI, you can move ahead for IVF. So summing up, I think I have made myself very clear that when we are planning IUI, keep it simple. Start with oral ovulation, move on to gonadotropin, select patient properly, and if your patient doesn't conceive, go ahead for IVF. So thank you very much for your patient hearing. I thank from my team, and I am open to question before we move on to the other presentation. Over to Dr. Chanchal.
Thank you, sir. And I request Dr. Kiran Chalna to ma'am please put questions taken by the participants. We have few questions by the participants.
Yeah.
Ma'am, please unmute yourself.
Okay. Hello.
Yes, Dr. Kiran.
Yes, you are audible.
There is question from anonymous attendee. Can you please tell the best stimulation protocol suitable to low AMH cases?
Low AMH cases, there is no best protocol. What we are looking at, as I have told you, that if you are having very low AMH, these patients, they are not for IUI. That is number one. You have to counsel these patients to move ahead, because this reserve, whatever they are having, they are actually having this gold with them. So only on AMH you don't decide the protocol, but certainly you have to take 2 more things in consideration. One is age. At what age you are considering that low AMH, and second thing is AFC. If you are having a young patient having low AMH and AFC of say 5, 6, then you can go ahead with the letrozole gonadotropin combination if you are planning for IUI. If you are planning for IVF, certainly we are going to have a gonadotropin protocol in these patients, and it should always be antagonist protocol for IVF. But here we are talking of IUI. So if a patient is young, AFC is okay, low AMH, you can start the protocol using letrozole and gonadotropin. But there is a question mark, how many cycles? That I will like to highlight, that these patients, after every cycle, if they fail, they should be counseled to move ahead for IVF, not starting a second cycle. So maybe 1 or 2 cycles if the patient is young, and AFC is good. But if you are having a combination of low AMH and low AFC, I think we need to counsel these patients.
Dr. Kuldeep, can I ask one question?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, if in PCOS patients, when we are stimulating, so in them, can we add the antagonist protocol?
For IUI, usually we don't use. Why you want to use antagonist?
You know, most of the times,
clear.
actually, we have to prevent the hyperstimulation in them. That is very, very important. Even when we are using the low dose protocols, if the 4 or 5 follicles are there, so perhaps if we use the antagonist protocol, we can do the IUI if the 3 or 4 are premature LH surge is not very common in them.
Yeah. See, if you are using
We have
antagonist,
to prevent the premature LH surge actually in them.
see, premature LS surge is seen in 20 to 25% of the cases.
Yeah.
But having said that, when we use antagonist, we may be able to prevent the surge, but because you are using antagonist, you will have to give agonist trigger, and
No,
once you are
just
giving
2 or 3 follicles are there. 3 follicles are there.
still, if you are giving antagonist, because your main concern is preventing the ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So if the situation is like that this patient is going for ovarian hyperstimulation, then you must use a agonist trigger. If you are using antagonist and giving SCG, then you are not reducing the risk of OHSS. So that is number one. If you are giving it for premature LS surge, you have to identify which patient is going for premature LS surge, and that is very difficult. So that's why it is not done routinely. But certainly, if the patient has shown that there is a premature LS surge, you can use antagonist. But it is not used routinely, and that is what I wanted to highlight here.
Yeah, not routinely, but sometimes we have to select.
Yes, you can. Individualization is always there.
Yeah.
Any other question, Dr. Kiran?
Yes. Can you please explain? Hello. Can you please explain the long, short, and ultra short protocols, and which is the best?
See, in IUI we don't. That is what I am saying. That IUI we don't use agonist, long, short protocol. We have to keep IUI very simple. I think I will like to highlight it again. You start with oral ovulation. If your patient doesn't conceive in 2 cycles with, or you are not having a satisfactory response, then move on to the combination, and final cycle you may go with gonadotropin. So within 4 cycles, your patient either conceives or move on to the IVF. That should be the idea. As Dr. Maninder has said, can be used antagonist. Yes, in selected patient you can use antagonist, but whether that will optimize your result, it is highly doubtful. So we don't give any long down regulation in these patients. In few patients where you are finding that LH is very high, these are the patients where you require a down regulation, and in those cases it is better to give OCP rather than giving the agonist down regulation, because once you are giving agonist down regulation, there is a very high suppression. You will be requiring more gonadotropin. When you are giving more gonadotropin, you will have high risk of multiple follicles. That you don't want actually in IUI. You want in IUI only 2 to 3 follicles. So that's why the down regulation, long down regulation is not justified here.
We have one more. Okay. Yes.
Hello.
How
to time insemination with LH kit? How to time insemination with LH kit?
How to time insemination with LH kit?
Insemination with
insemination. So if you are using LH kit, though it is not a very good idea to use LH kit, it is better to time your insemination with trigger. But if you are using LH kit, then whenever there is a increase in the LH, okay, so you have to do LH regularly, and once you see the LH detected, 24 hours after LH detection, you can go for your IUI. So that is how you time. So 24 hours. Once you see the surge, then it is 24 hours.
Next question is, how many cycles for low MH?
How many cycles?
For low AMH.
Maybe
maximum
one.
Number, basically.
Maximum number, there is nothing like that. You have to assess that patient, that how much you can afford. If see, only on AMH you don't decide. You combine again age, AFC and AMH, and then decide how many cycle you can afford.
So we have one question also from Dr. Yes, ma'am, please complete. Sorry.
Which dose of SCG is optimal for trigger?
Usually we use 5,000.
5,000.
Yeah, urinary. If you are using urinary, it is 5,000.
And what is the role of antibiotics after IUI?
Usually not given. We don't use antibiotics.
Okay. These are the questions, sir.
One more interesting question is here. Yeah. Dr. Anuradha has asked, if one tube is patent, then we should go for IUI or IVF.
Yeah, that is what if the one tube is patent and you are sure that the tubo-ovarian relationship are good, you can go for IUI for a few cycles. There is no problem in there. But here we are doing IUI only in that cycle when we are having the ovulation on the same side. On the same side. So, but otherwise you can go for IUI if there is no other factor. Okay. When you are seeing a endometrioma, both tubes were patent, then I will not go for IUI, even both tubes are patent. Okay. So depending on tubo-ovarian relationship, if on ultrasound you are seeing that there are the adhesions in the pouch of Douglas, these patients I will like to put a scope, see, correct, and then go for IUI.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the wonderful talk.
Hello. There are a couple of questions in chat box also.
Yes,
One is please explain what is premature luteinization.
Premature luteinization is basically when you are having multiple follicles or a short follicular phase, or there is a discrepancy between the follicular growth. So when you are having a follicle which is started producing, there is a premature surge, so there is a high amount of progesterone in the circulation which luteinizes the follicle. Normally it happens after the ovulation, but in these patients it is happening before ovulation. So there is no ovulation, but the progesterone is there in the circulation, and that luteinizes the follicle. So turns into luteinized and the pituitary follicle.
Dr. Kuldeep, there is one more question. In motility in post-wash samples, only rapid linear is of significance, or no linear or slow motion should also be counted?
No, we always keep in mind rapid linear progressive.
Another
when it is 50% motile, it is RLP, not sluggish.
Okay. And the another part is, if during IUI ET is between 6.5 to 7, is there a role of estrogen in luteal phase? Vaginal progesterone dose for luteal phase? What a question.
You can give in that particular cycle, but not routinely. It is better to change to the better protocol in next cycle. So in that cycle, you can use estrogen and continue till period or pregnancy. So that you can do.
Vaginal progesterone dose for luteal phase.
Sorry?
I think we can move on. We are getting short of time now. We can move on to the panel.
We can take up the question later.
At the end.
Yeah.
So I would like to invite the panelists for our panel on restarting fertility practices in COVID era. Our panelist for the day is Dr. Mala Arora ma'am. Dr. Mala Arora ma'am she is Director Noble IVF Center and she is founder president of our society, Faridabad Obs and Gynae Society. Ma'am had been chairperson ICOG 2017, vice president Foxy 2011, and she had edited many books and writer and recurrent pregnancy loss. Welcome, ma'am. Dr. Maninder Ahuja, the youngest gynecologist of our society, ma'am. She is heading Ahuja Healthcare and Dental Infertility Center in Faridabad and had been working dedicatedly for women from adolescent to menopause since last 40 years. Welcome, ma'am. And our young dynamic Dr. Aradhana Gupta, she is Director IVF Specialist of Aradhana IVF Center, Bhopal. She has been visiting senior consultant in IVF specialist in various hospitals in Delhi NCR. Previously, she was at Fortis Bloom Fertility Center, Faridabad. Welcome, Dr. Aradhana. Dr. Aradhana Kalra, the beautiful gynecologist. She is senior IVF specialist at QRG Health City, Faridabad, and Milan IVF Center at Delhi. She had been recipient of many prestigious awards, including Bhagyamay Purushottam Award in Manipal 2003. Welcome, Dr. Aradhana. Dr. Divya Kumar, she is senior consultant Obs and Gynae and ART at QRG Health City and with experience of 14 years. Previously, she had been working with KJ IVF with Dr. Kuldeep Jain. Welcome, Dr. Divya. Dr. Vinita Khar, IVF specialist and laparoscopic surgeon at Metro Heart Institute, Faridabad. She had her FNP and FICOG training at Ruby Hall, Pune. Welcome, Dr. Vinita, as a panelist. Dr. Lakshmi Goyal, consultant at Bloom IVF Center, Fortis Escorts, Faridabad, and FMRI, Gurgaon. She also had a fellowship in reproductive medicine at Aspire. Welcome, Dr. Lakshmi. And last panelist, Dr. Seema Madan, our own KJ IVF consultant at KJ IVF Center with Dr. Kuldeep Jain. She had been assistant professor at PGIMS Rohtak. Welcome, Dr. Seema. Over to Dr. Kuldeep Jain, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Chanchal. Can I share my slides?
Yes, sir.
So welcome again. It is really a wonderful panel which is Dr. Chanchal has given to me. Two very senior gynecologists of Faridabad, and Dr. Mala is and Dr. Maninder, they are national figure. So welcome Dr. Maninder, Dr. Mala on this panel. It is really great to have you on this panel. And then we are having a whole brigade of young, energetic, dynamic, and excellent clinicians with us on this panel. So what we are going to discuss is the how to start, restart basically the fertility services in COVID times. So again, of course, you all are with me. So I will skip this slide now. These are some of the questions which I am going to address, and I hope my panelists will be very happy to answer these queries. This all started on 25th January when everybody of us was saying, COVID, what is COVID or what is Corona? It won't hurt us. And then in March, actually, the lockdown came, and we thought that we will be able to control it with lockdown. And May have gone, June, July has started. There's no end to it. And then we started thinking maybe we have to restart our services because we don't know when this is going to end. And that's why this question came, and we started thinking that how to start. If we have to start, how to start. So when we are no longer be able to change a situation, rather we should change ourselves. That was the thought. There was a lot of questions when we started thinking of opening the fertility services, because the government, from government side, there was no initiative. It was always only emergency services can be provided, and fertility services are not considered emergency services or basic services even. So is there any need to reopen fertility services? I think that was the question. And this question comes to Dr. Aradhana. What is the need to reopen fertility? Because they are not considered the essential services. So is there any need to reopen fertility services? Dr. Aradhana Kalra.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Basically, infertility undoubtedly comes under non-essential services. But when we think of the emotional aspects, mental aspects, and many a time situation wherein treating the infertility would sound like an emergency. So I am talking of situations wherein there are cancer patients. Undoubtedly, they are of our highest priority. Then there are other patients where delay would affect their outcome, like patients with advanced age who want to go ahead with their own gametes, with decreased ovarian reserve, with debilitating conditions like endometriosis, and many such conditions. So by now we realize that we are in a situation where we have to learn to live with corona. Before lockdown, we started at 7K. Today we are at 7 lakh plus. So undoubtedly we have to start. We have to triage. We would be first to address all these patients, and then eventually and gradually we will have to reconsider all other patients, keeping the third-party reproduction aside for a while.
Dr. Mala, will you like to comment a little more on why we require the fertility services?
Thank you, Kuldeep. I think it is a very thought-provoking question. As Aradhana said, when there is an urgency, you may consider starting your fertility services. But for the non-emergency, I think another consideration is to see how safe is it for a pregnant woman to get COVID. If that is going to aggravate her situation during pregnancy, we might as well delay it for a few more months. I personally have been thinking hard about it and have not started my frozen embryo transfers yet, because I feel in the interest of the safety of the patient, it is important that we keep her safe first and then get her pregnant. But obviously those that are in urgent need, like advanced age or malignancy, will have to go ahead. But it's again an individual tailor-made response. I think about the exposure the patient gets while coming to the clinic, and the exposure your staff gets when they come and work and are exposed to the patients, because you are responsible for both of them. And the disease can spread bilaterally. If a patient comes to your clinic and gets COVID positive, that is also a worrying situation.
So basically, yeah, Dr. Maninder.
I think I have a different view, because besides these conditions of poor ovarian reserve and everything, and our added stress, anxiety, depression is there, and not having a child is going to increase that depression. But there are certain special situations where we cannot avoid, like autoimmune disease patients who are into now recessive phase. That is the time when they have to have their treatment. Otherwise, they will again go into the phase. Those are the patients. Then sometimes male infertility treated patients who are responding now. So they also need the treatment at that time. So anyway, none of us is taking COVID positive patients, and we are taking all the precautions. I think none of us is taking. And if by chance any patient comes positive, we are taking all the precautions of having the staff and getting them tested and quarantine our staff. So everything is taken. So I don't think we are going to add anything extra risk to them, especially if we are triaging our patients by proper history, by proper their online testing of those 13 questions which are there already, whether they have come into contact with somebody, whether somebody was there in household who was positive, where their surroundings were there, where they have traveled or something like that. 13 complete questions are there. So when we are taking those questions with all our patients here, I don't think we are giving them any extra risk. But still, there are protocols when what we have to do when we have to start triaging, and if they are suspicious, then we can get them tested also before start of application and on the.
Actually,
can I speak?
Actually, keeping all these.
May I speak, sir?
Yeah, you can. Yeah. Please,
sir, I would like to go ahead with what Dr. Mala said. She's absolutely right. See, there are different kinds of patients. We have to have a very individualized and pragmatic approach. Talking about the patients who are poor responders or who are with advanced maternal age or are having cancer right now, so they need to have a cryopreservation of their gametes. In those patients, it's justified. But rest of the patients... See,
we are talking, Dr. Benita, we are just talking whether we should open fertility services or not, and these are the factors which were taken into account when we started thinking of whether we should open, and if we have to open, how we need to open. So that brought all three societies like Indian Fertility Societies, in ISAR and ACE together, and we formed a task force keeping all these factors, whatever is being said, whatever you are saying, whatever Dr. Mala has said, because we have to balance it and need to think whether if we have to open, how it is to be opened, and if not, why not. So when this question was asked whether we should open or not, everybody said yes, we need to open. So there has to be prioritization. And if you know, I don't know, last 15 days back, ASRE, International Federation of Fertility Society, and ASRM, they came out with a very bold statement that fertility services should be considered as emergency services and they need to be opened, keeping all these facts in mind. So I think now the question becomes redundant that whether we should open or not.
Absolutely right, sir. But actually, it should be a restricted approach rather than an approach that everyone should undergo. We should categorize our patients, the one who actually need, in whom it is an urgent thing, and then categorizing the patients who are non-urgent. We should actually give them a choice whether they want to go ahead after discussing all kinds of risks with them.
Yes, certainly that we will discuss how we are going to counsel our patients if we are offering these services to them. So this is the document which is now on the website of IFS, ISAR, and ACE, and we had 5 leaders from all 3 societies had discussion for 7 days to make this statement, and now this is submitted to Ministry of Health as well as ICMR for their consideration. Okay, so whatever till then, this is not the guideline, this is the recommendation, and this has to be used as recommendation only, not as guideline. There are a lot of material. Even we are having patient information sheet, we are having triaging, how it needs to be triaging, and then lot of consents. So I think everybody who is practicing infertility should read this document and take a lot of steps on the basis of this statement for a safe practice. Coming on to the next question. So as far as the opening is concerned, we have decided that fertility services should be opened. Of course, prioritization has to be there. what services are to be provided, what need not be provided, they need to be individualized, but certainly fertility services need to be open. Now, once we have decided that fertility services need to be open, next question comes, what should be the code of conduct to patient and to the center? Okay, so this question comes to Dr. Divya.
Yes. Sir, definitely, as we have discussed in the first, as our first question, that fertility services need to be open, and that is almost an unanimous decision from the fertility care providers all over the world. So, but then definitely there need to be a certain code of conduct before we open. We have to prepare ourselves because as we all say, we have to learn to live with COVID, and this is a new era for healthcare providers, and we have to prepare ourselves. So preparing is like as for us, the healthcare providers, it is concerned, we have to prepare our whole.
So for the Dr. Divya, because we are having a lot of questions, so my question is little direct. For hospital, what should be the code of conduct?
For hospital, we need to have a triage area. We need to have, we should be redoing our OPDs, and we have to divide ourselves in mini teams so that not everyone is exposed, because as per the present scenario, every person has to be treated as a COVID positive patient unless proved otherwise. The visits for the patients, it has to be minimum visits. The facility
for you tell me about the hospital first, so we move
hospital on. Sir, the OPD, there has to be certain triage questionnaires which should be given to all the patients who are coming, and depending on that, on the triage questions, you have to decide whether the patient, if the patient is symptomatic, needs to go for COVID testing or not, or if the patient, the history has to be like for past 14 days, history of exposure has to be there, history of contact has to be there, and a thorough history pertaining to COVID scenario need to be taken. There, the seating arrangement in the OPD needs to be changed. Social distancing needs to be maintained. The cleaning has to be a little COVID friendly, sort of like it has to be cleaned with a light disinfectant. The wearing of mask has to be mandatory for everyone, for the staffs as well as for the patients who are attending. Then the use of alcohol-based sanitizers has to be there. It's not very expensive also, and like it is friendly also. So it's one practice which we all can do just to avoid this COVID negative contamination from one to other. Social distancing has to be there, and depending upon the triage has to be a thorough triage for each and everyone who is attending the.
Actually, when we talk of triaging, there are some recommendation that triaging should be done at what place?
So at the entry place, at the entry where the patient is entering.
Online, sir.
Yeah, I think
outside the reception area.
2 weeks earlier than stimulation.
Yeah, Dr. Maninder, you will like to suggest something, because these are the practical points.
And they have already been suggested by Ashray in various speakers also. The only thing is that you should start your triaging 2 weeks before you intend to start the stimulation. At that time, you have to take the patient into confidence about all the complications which can be there, and even when they start the treatment, they will have to be tested whether they are positive or not. And 2 weeks earlier, we'll be taking.
I am not discussing the stimulation here.
Yes.
If patient wants to come to you, how you are going
telephonically or WhatsApp or by emails. You have to take their
telephonic triage has to be done.
Get their test done, and then you decide whether you have to stimulate them or not. So at that time, we have to do their proper counseling, that even during the treatment, if they come positive, then we might have to cancel the cycles even. So when we are doing testing, that is one triaging 2 weeks earlier, then when we start stimulation, when we call the patient at that time, again that triaging is there. And if they are suspects, then they are tested. Then if they start the stimulation, then after 10 days before giving trigger, again the triaging done, again the history taken. And if they are found to be suspects, then again we can go for either the RT-PCR or at that time even IgG or IgM testing, antibody testing can be done. So these are the guidelines which are telling. And then you have to, of course, train your staff, complete staff, at how the patients have to be received. Patients have to be given timings of about half an hour or 1 hour slots are there. In the OPD, there should not be more than 3 meter distance should be there. So you have to reorganize your OPDs. And in the OPD only, your infrared thermometer temperature should be checked up. And then your, again, triaging history has to be signed. And again, your that hand sanitization, mask, everything should be there. The patient should be instructed not to bring any bags with them, and reports if they can send online beforehand. It's better you get the reports tested so that you can have the minimum exposure to the fomites also.
Anyone wants to add any other point?
Yeah, I would like to add one.
Because I am working in a small setup. So my setup is super specialty. We are only 2 people. My husband is a nephrologist and I am IVF specialist. So because the nephrology patients, they are very sick patients. They might be positive, you never know. So we have made a separate entry for our patient because we are having elective patients. We are not dealing with emergency. So we have made a separate entry.
So
number one.
That is okay. That is okay, Dr. Aradhana. Here we are discussing the wider points.
Yes, sir. So wider points are, first we do the video consultation.
If you want to add something in whatever is told by Dr. Dibya and Dr. Manindra.
Sir, I want to highlight one more thing. We have kept a cloth which is dipped in the hypochlorite solution at the entry point, so that the infection which comes with the shoes, that can be taken care of. So this is one more thing. And every 2 hours we do the spray over all the seats. So this is one thing we are doing. And before entry into the chamber, like in my chamber, I have put a transparent curtains just to avoid infection. And all the reports, patient, they WhatsApp us first, and then we read, and then we call the patient. So these are the things.
Again, what I will like to highlight.
Sir, can I just summarize this in like what I have been thinking? The 4 T's. 1, when the patient comes in, is triage. 2 is, are you prepared for the patients for COVID training? So for the training, the mock drills, all the SOPs. SOPs obviously would be pertaining to the hospital and to the patients, like the questionnaires, the use of sanitizers, the mop or the shoe covers, or the recommended guidelines for the doctors with the face shield and the FFP2 masks. Then triage, training, and then is teams. We divide our staff into teams so that we have backups. And then the last one would be a timing. That is, the spacing of our patients, to time the patients when, what they need.
Okay. So,
I would like to say one thing, sir. It is just a key point. Expose yourself less and ask your patients as well as the staff to expose themselves less. So that should be the key point. They should be signing a code of conduct that they have been following these instructions, and these signatures should be taken daily.
Yeah, actually what I will like to highlight, all these points, actually everybody is devising on their convenience, and of course
Everybody's
yeah. So what we actually discussed, how to see what we are looking at, how to minimize the number of visits, how to expose less and less, and is there any need of any change in your current practice? Okay, because you were practicing something different, and now is there any need? So these 3 areas were discussed in detail, and what we come out when we are talking of infertility services, because we know that one patient will be coming multiple times. Okay.
So you can reduce that by teaching her self-injection and not calling her for injections.
Yeah. So we starting from the consultation, because first will be the consultation. So it is advised that most of the consultation, initial consultation, could be on video consultation.
Yeah.
If it is a new patient, you can always ask for to take them the video consultation, and once you feel that this patient need to come, without that you cannot proceed ahead, then only you give the appointment to them. All patients must visit hospital only whenever it is required. That was something which was always after every discussion it was said, and I think that need to be carried with each and every, whether you are doing a simple ultrasound scan, or for that matter IUI, or going for IVF. So minimize the number of visits, and that can be minimized by opening the video consultation to your patient. That is one change which was suggested, and I think everybody should practice that. Second thing, most of our patients, they are coming with attendants. Okay, lot of attendants. So when you are giving appointment to your patient, ask them to come either singly, or if their husband has to come or a relative has to come, then only one attendant. So maximum one attendant is permitted. That needs to be adhered very, very strictly. Third thing, whenever they are coming to hospital, they need to check the appointment for what they are coming, and when they are entering to the hospital, they are given, everybody has said, triaging form. So these forms are available. They need to be filled up, and during consultation only wife or husband, whosoever is required in the chamber, they should be talking to you. Most of the time we have started now, because in our practice, because these were some difficult practical points that were very difficult to implement, and then we thought that even husband is sitting outside, because somebody suggested the husband should not come inside the hospital. I said that it is not possible. Okay, because until unless you discuss with the husband, you are not going to go ahead. So if it is possible, you can examine the patient and then talk with the husband. So one by one you can take them or together. That will depend on the situation, how the patient is reacting to your suggestions. But certainly minimal attendance should be coming to your hospital. Minimum number of visits, like if you can avoid a visit, try to avoid. Third thing, whenever you are doing a ultrasonography, ultrasound room is the most common place where the traffic is more. Okay, so after each and every ultrasound, the sanitization of ultrasound machine as well as sanitization of cot is recommended, and that is very, very important, because that is the place where the lot of contamination may go from one patient to other and to your staff also. So I think these 3 or 4 things are very, very important whenever you are asking your patient to come to the hospital. Then of course triaging has been discussed. Any other point somebody wants to highlight for initial workup? Then we move on to the other thing. Initial workup, anybody wants to highlight that this is not touched in our discussion? Anyone can add. Dr. Seema, Dr. Vinita, or anybody? So this is
somebody who needs a tube testing.
Yeah.
It is important that laparoscopy is again a procedure that causes a lot of aerosolization, and tube testing is a procedure that has to be looked at with great caution.
So HSG, what do you think of HSG? If the patient requires HSG, it should be done or not?
Again, it is a question of how urgent you think you want to do that HSG, because during HSG, she's again exposed to more people. There's a radiologist, there's a technician, there are vaginal secretions that people are coming in contact with.
Yes, so I think that was again discussed, and whatever procedure you are planning, whether it is HSG or it is semen analysis, because all procedures are going to expose the patient to the staff, multiple people will be, so try to avoid extra visits, extra unnecessary procedures. So if it is must, then of course you can go ahead with observing all precautions. Okay, and patient need to understand that this procedure may increase the risk of infection to that patient. I think that is very, very important. Do you recommend testing, corona testing before HSG? Anyone? Dr. Mala?
See, for the benefit of the healthcare workers, I don't think we can implement corona testing before HSG, but because that will not drain our resources unnecessarily. But all patients have to be treated as corona positive when you're working with them.
So I think universal precautions are very, very important, because with each and every procedure you may not be able to test the patient, and whatever recommendation we are making, we have to keep the local situation, because government is changing every now and then their recommendation. So we need to follow the local recommendation and then advise the patient, because if you have advised the test but it is not available to asymptomatic patient, it was not available to most of the patients, only symptomatic patients, so even if you are writing, it is not applicable. So you have to keep in mind the local situation before you write the test and other things. Okay, many times patient will also say that why you are getting this test done. So you should be able to convince the patient that it is required, it is the recommendation, and if the patient refuses, then better not to do that test if you feel that it increases the chances of infection to your staff or to the patient.
So we can follow these patients after HSG, that if they are having any symptom after the test. So after every procedure, if we are not getting COVID test, it's better we should follow them. I mean, they should not disappear after getting HSG done. I think this we should keep in mind.
Yeah, that is okay. That is okay. But again, that is not in your hand. If the patient doesn't want to come back, he will not come.
Patient must be honest.
So I think this question is already answered partially by Dr. Divya. Do you need a change in your infrastructure or practice in the light of pandemic? Will anybody like to highlight a few more points here?
The new normals, they have to be adopted now in all the infrastructures, whether we are doing a gynae practice or obstetric practice. So the thing is that we have to triage them by history only. But the only thing where have to COVID testing is mandatory.
No, change in infrastructure or in your practice. Infrastructure is already.
Patients now, what the centers are doing is that they are grouping their staff into two groups, so that they are making their teams, so that one team is coming for 7 days and the other team comes for 7 days, so that in between, if some patient comes, they are working, this center is not closed down. So that is how they have changed their practice styles also. And of course, the universal precautions which are being taken up, mask, hand wash, sanitizer, and sanitizing the room, sittings, and even ultrasound tables, everything that has to be maintained. That is a change in practice which we had not earlier.
So
but now we have to do in all the patients.
So this is
another important point is
one more important is
payment
please one by one. Please one by one.
The payment should be all made digital so that your receptionist is not exposed to exchanging money, notes, currency.
Okay, that is okay. Yeah.
Centrally, the hospital they should take care of not to get this infection spread to other places. I think Central AC hospital must make some changes.
Basically here this slide shows what all is required to be changed in your OPD. Poster for awareness. I think
they are there already.
Video consultation, physical distancing, that you have to mark and that needs to be adhered to. Okay. And there should be dedicated staff for cleaning surfaces, sofa chairs, examination beds, and this needs to be documented because it is very important. When something medical legal happens, then this will come on you that you were not maintaining the required cleanliness in your hospital, because that has happened. I think in Mumbai, that one patient has sued a hospital that because I came in your hospital and your hospital was not maintaining cleanliness, so you have to have a roster of cleaning in every room in the waiting area, and that needs to be adhered to by the cleaning person that you are maintaining the cleanliness. This is it is
here your cleaner is not wearing a PPE kit. I think your cleaning staff has to wear a PPE kit because they are dealing with waste disposal which can be infected.
Yeah, so as Dr. Mala is suggesting, this is the PPE required for OPD staff. In OPD, they need to have hospital scrub, caps are required, masks are required, Google or face shield are required, and hand hygiene is required. So if your OPD staff is maintaining this thing, I think that is sufficient. You need not to wear PPE in OPD or any other thing. So if your hospital staff is observing these things in OPD, that is sufficient.
Anyway, the weather is so hot at this time, even wearing double mask is a problem.
Yes, it is a problem.
Wearing complete PPE is giving a punishment only. So I think if they wear the face shields plus mask, that is sufficient, plus gloves or hand washing frequent and hand sanitizer.
Yes.
Goggles they can wear after saving their eyes. If they are basic face shield, then they don't need. So some of the centers they have made the small video films of how they are accepting the patients. They have to stand there, they have to tell their history, then hand sanitization, masks have to be tested, then they have to told about everything, posters which are hanging there that how you have to enter the room, the only one person will be entering there. So all these instructions are given them there. So they have prepared those videos. So that tomorrow if somebody tells them that they were not taking the precautions, they can show that 3 minutes videos that this is our routine practice, what we are doing. Even cleaning the surface, even ultrasound sheet is being changed. Normally we are always now using that paper sheets there, which are being changed with all the patients. The gloves, so we were definitely using even earlier also, even for ultrasound we were using normally, but now after the patient is gone, all the ultrasound cords and everything is cleaned and the table is clean. Then the patients where they were sitting, they are also sanitized completely. And my table is absolutely clean. There is no mementos, nothing at all. There's just one table, one pen and pad is there. So that cleaning becomes easier now and it's effective.
Yeah, I think Dr. Lakshmi has not commented till now. So this is for USG room. Dr. Lakshmi, what do you suggest how you should call the patient for follicular monitoring? Can you avoid the visits? What are the recommendations for IUI, for follicular monitoring, or for IVF for that matter?
Sir, I think we should avoid the visits to the minimum, especially if patient is coming for the follicular monitoring in IUI. Then she should be, first of all, she should be told about, she should be counseled about all the risks. And then she can be offered to go for a follicular monitoring, like she can have a follicular monitoring in some other center as well, so that she can minimize the visits in the hospital.
No, I don't think that should be recommended. You need not to change the practice in that way. What you can do, you should do, you can minimize, like if you are calling a patient every alternate day.
We can call her after like 3 days.
So depending on the response, depending on the response. So that is the way you can minimize.
So if she goes to some.
No, because you will not be able to follow. Yeah,
she can also tell the reports by video, like video consultations, or by the WhatsApp. That can also be done. But most of the time we always tell patient that she should have minimum visits, and that we have to minimize the follicular monitoring whenever she's coming. So like instead of coming alternate days in IUI, she can come on day 2nd, day 9, and then directly on day 12 or day 13, the day where we have to get triggered. So
what should be the clinical protocol, cleaning protocol for ultrasound room?
Yes,
anyone can take. Very relevant point I want here, so everybody is benefited.
So first of all, the floors of the ultrasound room should be with 1% sodium hypochlorite always.
How frequently? How frequently?
It should be done after every patient.
No, that will not be possible. That will not be possible.
Ideally,
yeah, no. Yeah. I think we need to keep practicality whenever we are recommending something. So floor cleaning every
twice in a day, at least twice in a day.
Every 2 hours or 3 hours, depending on the
workload or patient load.
Depending on the traffic. If you are having a very busy OPD, busy ultrasound room, every 2 hours floor cleaning is recommended. If you are having a OPD which is not very heavy, maybe 3 hours. What about the ultrasound machine?
Sir, can I add
what
something?
What about the ultrasound machine? No, my question is now direct. What about the ultrasound machine, probe? How frequently you need to clean?
Ultrasound machine needs to be cleaned after every patient.
Yes, so every patient.
The recommendation was Sidex. Now, depending upon your machine, what is safe, you can clean it with Sterilium or with Sidex.
Yes, so after every patient,
machine and table.
After every patient, you need to clean. What about the bed?
Machine and bed, table. Every patient.
Bed, how you are going to clean?
So either you can
one by one. Please.
Either there can be a disposable sheet which is changed after every patient, or you do not put any sheet or disposable sheet or bed sheet. There's a leatherite, you clean it with sodium hypochlorite after every patient, or an alcohol-based sanitizer.
No, you have to cover the patient also, so you will have to use the sheet.
2 sheets. No, I'm talking about the sheet on the bed. The patient sheets are different. So the sheet on the bed, either we use disposables.
What about the covering sheet?
The covering sheet needs to be different for all the patients, sir.
Yes. So either you use disposables or you use a separate sheet for every patient. That is very, very important. Third thing is your working table. How frequently you are going to clean the working table?
After every patient.
Yes. So working table also need to be cleaned after every patient.
Normally, I don't let them keep their hands on my table. Tell them to sit just at the back of the chair. They don't have to touch my table at all. Patient.
Yeah, so cleaning we have discussed a lot.
Take them
as they
any embryologist here? Is there any embryologist in panel?
No.
Okay, so this is because we have embryology lab, and probably the embryology lab is the safest place in your hospital. And if you follow all universal precautions which you were taking before, because it is zero bacteria lab, if you are maintaining all precautions as you were taking before, there is not much change in the embryology practice. That is very, very important. Only thing, whenever you are collecting the semen, because semen is supposed to be again a contaminant that will be coming to your lab. So either you have a separate andrology lab. If you are not having a separate andrology lab, then you have to be extra careful when you are handling semen. Wearing the face shield is difficult while you are working in lab, so face shield are not really required. Many of the embryologists, they don't use gloves when we are doing the procedure. So I think that practice needs to be changed. Whenever we are handling any follicular fluid or any material which is coming from the patient, that you need to wear the gloves. Otherwise, there is not much change in the embryology practice for COVID. So if you can maintain your lab as you were maintaining before, that is sufficient.
Dr. Kuldeep, there's just one point more. That is the disposal, biomedical hazardous disposal of the semen sample and the follicular fluid. That has to be done in a double bags and a separate containment, and they should be disposed of properly. That is very, very important in these cases. That is the extra precaution we have to take.
Sir, can I say a few things? Sir, we have done licensing with the other centers because everybody is running, its own center. We don't have any corporate sector in the Bhopal. So I think before starting the practice, like 2 months back, we have made a group and we have decided that we will do our cycle in knowledge with each and every person. Though we have not started yet ovum pickup, but we have started like OPD and IUI, we have started. So if anybody gets positive, if anybody is symptomatic, if any hospital is like by chance having a positive patient, then patient can be shifted to other center, and that should be told beforehand with the written consent. So this is, I think, before starting this practice, the small centers, they can make a group like this.
Yes, again, no, that is recommendation for each and every one of us, whether you are a small center or a bigger center. Before starting the IVF cycle, you need to have a backup. So the patient cycle is not disturbed. What are the recommendations? You should have 2 teams, A team and B team, and in the lab also, in the clinic also, as well as in the nursing staff also. So at any given point of time, your one team is always available. That is number one. Second thing, if your center is closed because of COVID restriction, then you should be having a backup somewhere nearby. If you are not having a backup, that is not a good thing to start until unless you are having a backup. So that is in the recommendation, and that should be practiced whether you are a small setup or you are a large setup. Okay. So this question is to Dr. Seema Madan. We have already discussed the diagnostics, semen analysis, HSG. What about histoscopy and laparoscopy? Should we start?
So they can be started. We need to prioritize the patient, but laparoscopy and histoscopy can be started. And during laparoscopy, we need to take certain precautions, both for the anesthetist and for the OT as well. For anesthetist, we can either use regional anesthetic to avoid unnecessary exposure, or we can use, anesthetist can use a block and a video laryngoscope to give the general anesthesia. And to avoid the OT exposure, we need to, like there is a lot of smoke generation during laparoscopy. So we need to evacuate smoke with the help of special filters attached to the suction and the trocar. And these should be attached to ultra low pressure apparatus.
Yeah, so I think she has highlighted very nicely.
I would like to add, sir.
How to prioritize which patient should be taken or which patient. Is there any guideline, Dr. Mala, on that?
On laparoscopy, the IAG has recommended that infertility-related laparoscopy need not be started. Only oncology laparoscopies are being done. And the suction, there has to be a special suction from the room, a negative pressure OT, so that this air is not leaking into the rest of the complex and is directly going out of the building. Also, the gas from the patient has to be regulated to be sucked specially so that it is not aerosolized. So I'm very wary about laparoscopy. Have you done any laparoscopy during the CEDA?
I have done a few, but they were all emergency. Routine procedure I have not started yet.
We should not be doing.
But what is the recommendation and what now I am going to practice? This again was discussed that prolonged surgeries need to be avoided. That is number one. Comorbidity patients need to be avoided. If the patient is not high risk, a short procedure can be done. This is the recent recommendation coming from our group as well as from ASHRAE. So they can be started. Prioritization has to be done. If it is must, it should be a short procedure under regional anesthesia, because laparoscopy problem is it cannot be done under regional anesthesia, and that's why people have, but surgeons have been doing now, and now I think this is the time we can start, but keeping in mind there should not be any comorbidity, and prolonged surgery needs to be avoided. So I think these are the recommendations which are coming now in July.
Sir, here in MP, we have given permission to do elective cases also, because we are very few active cases, hardly 3,000 kind of the active cases only in whole MP. And comparison to Delhi, where 25,000 or more than that are active cases. So government has given permission to do the elective cases also, if they are really needed, kind of the not emergency but.
So basically, what is the recommendation for surgery? You have to make your OT COVID ready. They are the guidelines. All OTs need to be adhering to these guidelines. Then all precautions need to be taken. Slowly we are going to open up. It is a matter of days only when we will start doing our all cases. But certainly, whatever cases you are taking, you have to be little careful. That is what is the recommendation now.
Sir, I have a question here.
Yes.
Is regarding the fertility practices, basically the surgeries for infertility. Are there any recommendation depending on the prevalence of cases in a particular area?
No. They are general recommendations. They are not specific to any area.
General
you have to use your common sense.
It is 2% prevalence for the general, as a general recommendation, I guess.
No. If you have prevalence of COVID, you should not be operating. This you have to use common sense.
You have to. Recommendations are just to guide you. Recommendations are just to guide you. You have to use your common sense first, and then you use the recommendation. Are there any special consent form for IVF or IUI in COVID time?
Yeah,
the same.
You should come up with certain clause.
Anyone?
The ISS, IAG, and the ISAR has come up with a consent form. The one you showed, they have come up with a unanimously come up with a consent form, which has all the criteria which need to be fulfilled.
They should some few clause should be added to the previous form. I think that will suffice.
Actually, this consent form is there. You have to download, and you have to give it to the person, counsel, because many patients, they will just sign it. So you ask the patient to read it and then sign it. It is very, very important, because there are 2-3 things which are very important here in the consent form, that your cycle may be cancelled if you turn COVID positive. I think they need to understand the financial implication of cancellation as well as
also.
Yes. So one is the cancellation. Second thing in the consent form is the risk, because there are no documented risk as far as the pregnancy is concerned, but they should be aware that whatever information is available, you are providing that only, because maybe in coming time there may be some risk to the fetus or something like that. Till now there are no extra problem as far as the COVID is concerned, so they should be knowing that. As far as the congenital malformations are concerned, there are no increase till now. So these are few points in the consent form, and it is very elaborate consent form. I think that suffices all the purpose. Even for IUI, we are having the same form. So these are some of the guidelines. I think both partners should undergo triage and PCR testing. Before you start IUI or IVF, now we are having a rapid antigen test also, so life has become little easier. So all patients need to go for PCR testing at the start of cycle as well as 48 hours before SCG. Now this may not be applicable to the, there was a lot of discussion whether for IUI also this is required. Ideally it is required, but IUI, it may be better to cancel if you are suspecting something. So single testing, at least single testing for IUI, and double testing before starting the stimulation and 48 hours before SCG. And if they, at any point of time, if it comes positive, then you have to cancel the cycle. If it is negative, you do the procedure as required. So these are the recommendations for IUI.
Kuldeep, in the lab, are you keeping these gametes in your regular, if you're freezing these embryos, are they in the same canister or you're using?
Yeah, again, that is very good point. What we have decided that post-COVID, you have to have a separate cryocan, because we don't know. Though the risk is very less, whatever data we are having, the risk of contamination in liquid nitrogen is very less, but still we are not having any supportive data. So that is the recommendation, that you should have all frozen sample in the separate can. Don't mix pre-COVID sample, you should not mix with the post-COVID.
Because somebody tested positive after the OPU, 7 days after the OPU. And that can be a worry because they may be in a window period at that time.
Yes. Yeah. So last question is, what to do if your health staff member turns positive? Anyone can take.
That is why now the change practices that you make 2 or 3 teams, 2 teams at least of your staff, so that you have them on the separate duties. So if one of the groups comes positive in contact with the COVID positive patient, which is rarely, but still then the second group that can come for the duty, and in the meantime, that group can go for the quarantine or the isolation for 10 days or 14 days, whatever is required.
We have already covered. What about the third party?
Very
impractical. Third party?
But sir, the contact needs to be specified. Like we come in contact, probably the surgeons or the
third party.
The contact needs to be specified. The doctors come in contact with patients every day, the one working in super specialty. So it has to be a direct face-to-face contact or contact with secretions. Then only we can put the person in quarantine.
I think there's a point I want to make here.
Without mask.
No, the recommendation is if your one health staff has come positive, then whosoever was there on that day on duty needs to be tested
for
and quarantined. Okay. Second team may need not to be quarantined and need not to be tested. So if you are having a tight segregation, then only it is possible. Otherwise, it is better to test everyone and then take the decision of quarantine. So I think that will be applicable, individualized in different centers. But yes, testing needs to be done and quarantine needs to be practiced.
But it's very impractical in a small
it is impractical. It is impractical.
How can you implement? Tell me.
No, because these are the, when we discussed and after we implemented, these are the problems which we are facing, everybody is facing. So we are collecting the feedback from everyone, and now we are going to have a second meeting, how to tackle these points and put in the practice.
Right.
So what about the third party reproduction?
It should not be done at this time.
Yeah, so I think everybody should restrict third party reproduction, and when you are using donor insemination, please don't take post-COVID samples. Pre-COVID samples can be used for donor insemination, but post-COVID sample need to be tested and only then can be used. So no third party for some time till the situation is clear. Till then you can use donor insemination, but it should be coming from the pre-COVID time. So that you have to ensure. If a patient or husband turns positive during cycle, what will you do? Who will take this question? Dr. Aradhana, Dr. Binita, anyone can take.
If a patient,
yeah.
One person.
Should I?
Yeah, you can.
What stage they are coming from?
If a patient or a husband, they turn positive during cycle, we actually need to cancel that cycle.
Yes. So I think that is very straight answer. If they turn positive during the cycle, cancel the cycle.
There is only one condition in which I would not like to cancel the cycle. If the patient is for cryopreservation in case of cancer, that is the only situation in which I would like to freeze the COVID sample. Otherwise, I would like to cancel this cycle.
Yeah, that is okay. But again, I think you have to be little careful if you are taking COVID positive sample in your lab. Then your lab will require to be closed for some time.
Shut down and thorough decontamination.
Yeah. So before taking that decision, you have to consider the closure of lab and closure of the OT till the green signal is available.
And the important point is financial repercussions. So our bodies, the consent form that is made, it clearly mentions this thing that in the wake of such circumstance, your cycle will be cancelled.
Your cycle will be cancelled. So I think you can cancel the cycle. There is no problem there. Will the center need to be shut down? No. 24 to 48 hours, depending on the local guidelines, your center will be closed, and then so that's why you have to have a backup facility. So finally, we should have triaging, disinfection, physical distancing, consent, and follow all SOPs in ultrasound room, OT, and lab, and then you can restart your practice, fertility practice. Anybody wants to, or maybe from each panelist, one carry home message.
I want to ask one thing. The guideline says that you have to go for COVID test on day 2. So if we are doing COVID test on day 2, we will get report after 48 hours. Here in MP, we are getting after 48 hours. And by the time we have to start the stimulation. So don't you think, sir, if she is positive in 2 days, so I think we can start little early?
Yes. You can.
We can start?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's better we should go for day 0.
Day zero.
And one more thing I would like to ask. They said that semen freezing not to be done for every patient. Sir, here we are doing semen freezing for every patient, and I think this is good.
You should avoid. No, I think
later on.
I think you should avoid semen freezing for the.
If we have done day 0, testing for both husband and wife, then can we take the sample same day? When the test comes negative? Can we take a sample and freeze it?
You can see, you have to prioritize whether semen freezing is required or not. But generally speaking, semen freezing needs to be avoided.
I think Aradhana's point is very valid. If you freeze the semen on day 3 or 4 when you've got a negative test, you're safer.
If later he becomes positive, we can use that semen. Otherwise, we have to freeze the eggs, and that would be costlier.
I can understand your point, I think.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, but I think that is what I'm saying. If the wife turns positive, okay,
so
husband turns positive, you cannot segregate that wife will be negative. Even if the test of wife is coming negative, she might be in the incubation period. So these are
the consent of isolation. Na?
Yes.
I mean, if it is positive, then the cycle as it is stands cancelled. And
yes.
No, but even if husband comes positive, wife can be in the incubation period.
The cycle stands cancelled as per guidelines in that case. So,
Dr. Kuldeep, I have to leave. I have an emergency patient.
Yeah. You give one take home
carry home message is there that COVID has become a normal way of life for us, and we should be taking universal precautions with all the patients with double mask, double gloves, face visors, and safe cleaning practices, safe distancing, physical as well as social, and we should enjoy this period and with safety precautions. Of course, we can take up the triage patients safely for our infertility practice.
Dr. Mala?
I think my most important message is that your class 4 staff needs to be taken care of. You see, that is the staff that will not have social distancing. They live in crowded areas. They may be coming by public transport. So you either need to have them stay in the premises, or they need to come and change their outfits or come on their own bicycle. But they need to be looked after the maximum, because they don't have the concept of you need to train them as to they have to wipe everything, keep gloves on all the time, keep a mask on all the time, have a gown on top of their clothes, so that they don't get contaminated and then pass it to the rest of the staff.
So I think Dr. Mala has brought out actually very good point which we have not discussed here. The training of nursing staff and the 4th class employees. I think every 5 days we have to take a online this thing, because we have to maintain the self distancing also. So but that is required every 5 day or 7 day. We have to tell them that what needs to be done, because it is not writing on the paper. Actually, you have to see, you have to check, and you have to train them. Otherwise, whatever we are discussing, it may be waste until unless they understand that this is need of our, they will not practice. So Dr. Mala has brought out a very, very, very valid point. Dr. Dibya?
The consent part I would like to highlight, the financial as well as the medical part, because there's high risk of cancellation, and it has to be documented that if the treatment is being started, then the patient is understanding all the consequences. The patient is ready for the treatment. So it's their call, and we are just helping them out. So that has to be there.
Dr.
I would like to say that it should be an approach in which we should leave it to the patient whether they want to undergo treatment right now or they want to postpone the patients, their treatment for later on. So this should be very important, because right now the studies are claiming that the blastocyst also shows receptor. The oocytes are also showing ACE2 receptors and CD147 receptors. So later on we might be knowing that they are carrying infection, and that might have epigenetic or genetic implications. So right now we are not having adequate studies.
Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Who else? Dr. Seema? Dr.
Yes, sir.
Aradhana? Yeah, one by one, please. One message. Yeah.
Clinic should lay down the standard operating protocols for proper disinfection of the OPD area, the lab area, the ultrasound room, and the OT. It's very important to avoid cross-contamination of the patients who are coming who might be exposed to the COVID, and they may transfer infection to the staff and to other patients. So for this, we need to lay down proper sanitizing operating protocols for sanitization of the clinic and the entire facility.
Dr. Lakshmi. Is Dr. Lakshmi there?
No, I think Dr. Lakshmi has left. She had some technical problem with her system.
Dr. Aradhana?
I think everything has been covered. I would just like to say that donor semen sample because post-COVID sample, later on we will get those samples. So pre-COVID semen sample, we have ordered pre-COVID samples in bulk so that later on we will not have a shortage of these things. And secondly, co-workers should not sit together and should not eat together. Co-workers must be focused more because they are by themselves, they are getting infection, chances of infection are more. So these two things I would like to take.
Okay, so it was a really wonderful discussion. We have covered a lot of things. Still a lot of things need to be discussed, maybe some other time. So what I will like to say, avoid procedure which can be postponed. Third party, just avoid. Post-COVID embryos, as we have discussed in separate tank. Avoid high-risk patient with comorbidities. Avoid laparoscopic surgery, individualized with all precautions. Maintain all records, very, very important, SOP and consent form for inspection. Anytime inspection team may come to you and you have to be little careful in this time. Follow local and central directives, very important. Whatever recommendations are there, you have to follow local and central directives. And of course, be safe, take care of yourself and your staff. So with this, I thank everyone, all panelists. They have really done a wonderful job. And we had covered a lot of things here. I thank Dr. Kiran, Dr. Chanchal, and the whole society for this wonderful opportunity of getting connected with everyone. So thank you. Over to Dr. Chanchal.
Sir, thank you for the wonderful discussion. Thanks to all panelists and Dr. Kuldeep. Really, I think the take-home messages are very clear to everyone. Yeah, and the best part is the only thing we should remember is we should keep ourselves safe. That is most important.
Very important.
If we are safe, we are going to work in future. I think Dr. Kiran would take over now. Dr. Kiran, ma'am.
Hello. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Kuldeep, sir. Very nice, very educative seminar. We are really thankful to all the panelists and all the beautiful audience who has listened to all. There were so many questions.
Yeah, I know, because the shortage of time is there. So anything, I will be available. You can contact me directly or on my WhatsApp number. I will be happy to answer because the time limitation is there. And in the end, I will like to thank Jackson Pal for their wonderful coordination, and they are always helpful, Dr. Deepika and team. So thank you, Deepika. Are you there? Thank you, Deepika, Dr. Bipin. And in the last, I will just like to take this opportunity again. Vote for me in September and elect me for Vice President Foxy, North Zone.
All the best, sir. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. I would like to take this opportunity and on behalf of Jackson Pal, I would like to thank everybody, the makers of Divagest SR 300, 200 milligram progesterone tablets and Lycorate Preg sachet in orange flavor. I'm Dr. Deepika, and along with me, my teammates, Dr. Tyagi and Mr. Amit Saxena, we all are really very thankful to all the experts for sharing such vast knowledge with all of us. Assure you our extended support for all your future activities. We are also really appreciative of the presence of all the attendees. without whose support we could not have done this event. So thank you so much. Until the next webinar, it's goodbye from all of us at Jackson Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.